When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. I just love that. He had time for his people. The Holy Spirit is just sitting down right now amongst you, because you know what? We need taught, not the ways of the world, but the ways of Jesus. And his disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. And he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Praise be to God that he is still teaching the crowds of his people.
I wanted to start by, thanks everybody. Thanks guys, you guys are awesome. You guys are awesome. By sharing a couple of things that happened to me a couple weeks ago. It was the last day of Lakeside Annual Conference, and you all are maybe familiar with the fact that once a year we have an annual conference. It's the annual conference at the West Ohio Conference of the United Methodist Church. We gather for prayer and various things, and actually there's a report out there, the annual conference report, to let you know a little bit more details. You can go to the website to get even more. But anyway, it's a several-day conference, and on the last day of the conference, two things happened to me, and just made me ask some questions about this kind of stuff happened to other people. And the first thing, we were in this 2,000-seat auditorium. We had just been given a break. And so we were all kind of standing up and stretching our legs. And the person who was next to me had a travel mug and was sitting on the floor. And I saw it got kicked. And so my reaction was, you know, if there's anything in it, it's going to spill. So I thought I better get it fast. And so I bent down, 2,000-seat auditorium. You know what I'm going to say. Those of you who were there know what I'm going to say. I hit my head on the seat in front of me. And the travel mug was empty, and it was all for nothing. And I sat there, and Dr. Jane Roach was next to me. She said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I think and I put my hand up, very tender, alrighty, big bump, you know. And Jane said, "Well, it's a good thing you have bangs." And then she was right, because I had a bump for several days, big, huge bump right there on my forehead. And fortunately, she told me what to do. She said, "Don't get up too fast, you might be dizzy," all this kind of stuff. And I thought, and actually I think I had this conversation. I said, "Am I the only one that this happens to? This stuff happens all the time." And she said, "No, it happens to me too." And I said, "Oh, good." The other thing that happened, and by the way, I had planned on the conference being done by noon on that day. And I found out the night before that I hadn't turned the page. There was a whole bunch of stuff going on yet the rest of the day. And of course I had a meeting scheduled for early Thursday morning, and it was after 7 p.m. Wednesday night up in northern Ohio, Lakeside, when I finally left. And so I'm driving around, and those few of you who went, you know what I'm talking about. There were detours, and so I'm driving 55 miles an hour on a road I never was on before. I didn't know where I was. I was somewhere in the country. I was hungry. It was after 7 o'clock. I found a little town. There was a drive-through. I went and got a sandwich and a lemonade. And so I'm driving again, and I noticed when she gave me the lemonade, it dripped kind of across, and I thought, well, that was sloppy, the way she must have poured it. And so I'm eating my sandwich, and I'm driving, and I go to get a drink of lemonade, and it's dripping all over me. And I thought, my cup has, you know, it's got a leak in it. And I went and I looked at the cup holder, and it was filled with lemonade. I thought, oh my God. And there's no cup, there's no place I can pour this. And I'm thinking, what do you do? What do you do? What would you do? I'm going to get this answer before the end of the morning. And so I ate my sandwich as fast as I could, took a big drink of lemonade, took off the top of the lemonade, tossed it. And then I thought, I'm going to have sticky lemonade all over my car. And again, I thought, am I the only one? Maybe it's just that I don't know how to handle life gracefully. Am I a wimp? Good, thank you. And here's the word. Am I meek? That's the word for the day. Meek. Most of us might have some idea what the word meek means, and it's probably actually not biblically exactly right on. So we're going to talk about blessed are the meek. And before I go too far, another very quick story. Half a millennia ago, in the 1600s, there was designed and constructed the St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And I have two pictures of this cathedral. Beautiful cathedral in London. And there's the outside of it, and then I also have one that is the inside of it. Just spectacular cathedral. And the architect, after this was finished, he decided that he was going to invite the royal family on a private tour of this beautiful building that was now built. And so he invited the royal family, and the king's comments were, "This is amusing, awful, and artificial." And the architect was overjoyed. Because in those days, and over in London, the word amusing meant what we would say is amazing. And the word awful actually meant awesome. And the word artificial actually meant artistic. And I give you that story only to say that words, sometimes over time, and sometimes across cultures, have different meanings. And we think of different things when we say them. And the word meek is one of those words. Most of us, when we think of meek, it's probably got kind of a negative connotation. And I don't know, I think of weak and wimpy, kind of meek. Everybody kind of walks all over them, they're meek. And so when Jesus says blessed, and that is, this is what you're aiming for, happy are, near to the heart of God. Blessed are the meek. Most of us go, well, I don't really want to be that. And yet, if you look at how the word meek is used in the Bible, I learned this week that in Numbers 12:3, it says, "Now the man Moses was very meek above all men which were upon the face of the earth." Now that doesn't sound like the meek I thought. He was meek. This is the Moses that God appeared to him in the burning bush, right? And this is the Moses that, this is the one that God called and said, you're going to free all of these Israelites, all these slaves, you're going to free over 1 million of them. That doesn't sound like a job for somebody who's meek. And it was Moses that courageously went up to the Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go." And it was Moses who courageously led them out and parted the Red Sea and received the 10 Commandments. It was Moses when everybody was complaining and murmuring and he kept pleading. And it was Moses who led them through the desert for 40 years and to the Promised Land. Doesn't sound like somebody weak and wimpy. What is meek? The best way to think of this word meek, when Jesus says, this is actually what you're pursuing, the happiness you're pursuing, this is it. Blessed are the meek. Best way to think about it is obedience to God. Obedience to God. Blessed are those who are obedient to God. I wrote on the outline, and if you want to follow along, by the way, it's on this. What color is this? It's either gray or purple, I'm not sure which. Answer. But anyways, on the outline I wrote, meek means obedience to God, and it has kind of, the Greek word is praus, and it has a connotation of being tamed, like a wild animal, which is interesting. We're like wild animals in some ways. We want to do it all our way, and yet there's a sense in which we have to recognize that there's a master. Obedience. And so I wrote on the outline there just three things that came as I thought about what does it mean to be obedient to God, to be meek. And so just to go through each of those. The first one I wrote is to be surrendered to God's will. We surrender to God's will. You know what? Christian hymn writers, Christian songwriters, there are so many songs, we just sang some of them, that talk about being surrendered to God's will. Hymn writers, last week in the traditional service, we sang, "Have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way." Today we're singing, "Take my life, let it be." Surrender, take my life. And today, we just sang this, and I've been singing it all week, actually. I give myself away. Here I am, here I stand, Lord, my life is in your hands. You hear the surrender there? I'm longing to see your desires revealed in me. Take my heart, take my life as a living sacrifice. Listen to this surrender. All my dreams, all my plans, Lord, I place them in your hands. Surrender. To be obedient to our God means, first of all, we surrender. Last week I mentioned about the shooting that happened in Charleston, South Carolina, which, by the way, is different than Charleston, West Virginia, where the kids are going. And I wanted to just read for you, as many of you know, all of you know, Dylan Roof opened fire on a Bible study in the African Methodist Episcopal Church in South Carolina. And of the 12 people who were there, he killed 9. And the reaction when those folks had a chance to speak to the one who had taken the life of their loved ones was astounding. And I want to read for you, and I'm sure you've heard or seen this in various places. But the daughter of Ethel Lance, so she lost her mom. She said, "I will never be able to hold my mom again, but I forgive you. And have mercy on your soul. You hurt me, you hurt a lot of people, but God forgives you, and I forgive you." Felicia Sanders, she was the mother of victim Twanza Sanders. So she lost her son, and she was one of the 3 survivors. She lost her son. She said, "Every fiber in my body hurts, and I will never be the same." But she says to Dylan, as he's standing there, she says, "As we said in the Bible study, we enjoyed you, but may God have mercy on you." And Elena Simmons, whose grandfather passed away in that shooting, Reverend Daniel Simmons, she said, "Although my grandfather and the other victims died at the hands of hate, this is proof. Everyone's plea for your soul is proof that they lived in love. Their legacies will live in love, so hate won't win." Isn't that amazing? Just astounding. But I was thinking about surrender and obedience. Do you know that in life, sometimes your will is different than God's will? And very often when someone makes us mad, we want to hate, we want to be. But Jesus over and over said, "Forgive. Forgive 70 times 7. Forgive. He kept saying, "Forgive, just as I forgive you. Forgive one another." And these folks understood. It wasn't about what they wanted. It was about surrendering to God's will. When my will is different than God's will, obedience says, I choose God's. Easy to say. Hard to do. Surrender to God's will. That's the first part of obedience. Second one is be steadied by God's presence. We mostly get this wrong in our culture, and if we leave it to ourselves, we tend to think that security and serenity and stability come from power and possessions and position. I remember thinking this when I was in college, thinking, you know, what am I going to do when I grow up? And I thought, you know, I'll get a good paying job because that'll be stability. And yet what happens, and not that, you know, it matters one way or another, if you use what you have for God's glory, it's good. But what ends up happening is that stability that we try to create actually causes, at times, insecurity, or it can. I was reading about Joseph Stalin, of all people, at the height of his power last century. And I have a picture of him, actually. He had this massive amount of power. And I was reading that during that time, during the height of his power, he had 7 bedrooms because he wanted to thwart any would-be assassins. He slept in a different bedroom every night, locked it up so that nobody would know where he was. He had 5 limousines, all of which went wherever he went so that nobody would know. They had curtains on the windows where he was. He had 1 servant hired just to monitor the tea bags. He had massive power, but he was afraid. All of the outer power in the world doesn't bring the peace that is what we're searching for. Blessed are the meek. Because what happens is when we surrender to God's will, we get a power beyond our own. We get God's power, His presence. And you know, John said earlier, we didn't have any idea when we, months ago, said this summer's going to be our We Love Chillicothe summer. You know, we're just gonna love this, everybody here in this city as much as we can. And then all this new stuff comes up. And we thought, you know what, we need this more than ever. And as we're prayer walking, I'll tell you what, I'll be careful. Pat always says, be careful. I'll be careful, and you know, we'll be safe, and we'll be wise. But I refuse to be afraid. I won't be afraid, because the power of Christ is with us. So we're steadied. So when we surrender, and then we're steadied by God's presence, not by our own. The third one is be self-giving for God's sake. Self-giving. Sometimes people think, oh, I don't want to go to church again because they're just going to give me one more thing to do. And I got too much to do already. And I always have to kind of think, we have to frame this correctly. And there's a little story that I want to share that helps to frame it. It's a story of a business executive, and he was having a really rough time at work. And he was just very stressed, and it was getting him down. And so he started coming home at night and just kind of separating himself from his family. He just had too much on his mind. And so he'd sit at the dinner table, but he never talked to his wife or his 5-year-old daughter. And then he'd move from the dinner table and go into the living room, and put his newspaper up and kind of wall everybody off. And he just was probably slipping into depression even. And he did this night after night until one day, one evening, after dinner, he went into the living room, put the paper up, and his 5-year-old daughter climbed up on his lap and pushed the newspaper down. I love that. I used to do that. I loved doing that to my dad. Push the newspaper down. And she wrapped her arms around her daddy and she hugged him as tight as she could. And he said, honey, stop. You're hugging me to death. And she said, no, I'm not, Daddy. I'm hugging you back to life. That's how I view what Jesus does to us. It's not that he's standing on that mountain going, you got to do this. He's giving us, and he has given all of who he is. And when we reach out into the world and touch somebody's life, it's just a response to what Jesus has done. I was thinking this week about Holy Week for some reason, and I was thinking about how Jesus, you know, came down that hillside next to Jerusalem on the donkey on Palm Sunday. And he was the King of Kings, and he was the Lord of Lords. And he was a shepherd who loved his sheep. And then how the week progressed, and on Thursday night, Maundy Thursday, he was sitting at that table with his disciples. And he, as you know, took bread, broke it, said, "This is my body broken for you. This is my blood shed for you." And then he said, "Do this in remembrance of me." Do what? What was he saying? I think pretty much every strain, every denomination of Christianity says, well, that was where he instituted Holy Communion. He said, take Holy Communion. I think there's even more to it. I think he was also saying, I'm about to get down on my knees and wash these disciples' feet. I, the Lord of the universe, am going to wash feet. And then the next day, he was going to the cross to give all of who he was. He was saying, I think, just as I have given myself for you, give yourselves to one another. Youth, you're going to do that. And it's not because you have to do it. It's because God, Jesus, has poured into you. Jesus gave his life for you. And now we get to give our lives to one another. So it's self-giving. My challenge for us this summer is to think of ways that you can love whoever it is in Chillicothe. It might be your neighbor next door to your house. It might be a young, an old, a sick, a healthy. And we're going to prayer walk or prayer drive. And you know, sometimes we get impatient with prayer. We say, well, okay, I'll prayer walk. I'll do that really quick. And then what do I do? And I want to challenge you on the praying. Because I have figured out as I look back that anything significant God has ever done through me started just by me praying. He honors that. He really does. We're going to have maps in the 4 churches of Chillicothe. We've done this similar thing, but not 4 church-wide. And we're going to highlight the maps. I cheated. I already started highlighting a little bit. It's not even up yet. Sorry. But, you know, I just wanted to do it. And we're going to be comparing the maps midweek to the other churches, so we'll be able to see all of the streets that all of our churches are covered in prayer. And I really want to have a goal to cover this city in prayer. I've begun walking on my own block, and I said to my daughter, we're having a block party. She said, no, we're not. I said, yeah, we are. And I was talking with Pastor Kirk from Trinity, and we live on the same block. So we're going to join forces, our 2 families, and have a block party. And it's not my gift area, but you know what? Sometimes you just do what God calls you to do. So, and you know, if you prayer walk the same area, you know, people were sitting out on their porch, and you get to talk with people for no other reason, just to love them and care for them. All right. Blessed are the meek, near to the heart of the living God, are those who are obedient, surrendered, strengthened, self-giving. I challenge you to be the same. Let's go to God in prayer, and then I'll invite you forward for Holy Communion. Gracious God, God, we don't even have words for the great privilege it is to fall before your throne as the body of Christ. And Lord, we do surrender. As much as we each would like control,
As much as we each would like to accumulate power and possessions, prestige, instead we give all of who we are to you. We know that even as we offer ourselves, you begin filling us up. You hold us, you fill us, you give us your mercy and your grace and your beauty and your glory. And when we bow before you, heaven and earth touch. And so once again, Lord, as we come to the table, or maybe for the first time ever, I invite folks in this room to just pray that prayer of commitment. Jesus, I love you. I don't have all the answers on what that means, but I give my life to you so that you can use me. Show us, use us, hold us. I pray all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen. I invite you to come